afternoon, everyone. I am Erite Weiler, and I am the Chief Operating Officer of The Atlantic. We are so excited to have all of you here today for a conversation about The Assistant with Julia Garner and directed by Kitty Green. We have here today our wonderful staff writer, Megan Garber, who's going to be moderating the conversation. We're so excited. For those who haven't seen it yet, The Assistant is inspired by testimony that depicts systematic abuse of power against women. This was brought to light, of course, by the courageous act of women in Hollywood, by the Me Too movement. Many of the films showcased this week at the festival, including this one, prove that film has the power to inform, elevate, and challenge the national conversation through storytelling. That's the very same thing that The Atlantic has been doing for the last 162 years for our readers, and that's why we're so particularly proud to be a partner for the festival for the second year in a row. So a big thank you to the Sundance Institute for having us here, and a huge thank you to Canada Goose for hosting us in the space today. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Megan to begin the conversation.
Awesome. Thank you so much, and hi, everyone. So I wanted to start with what I think is a fitting coincidence of the timing of this conversation, which is we are having this conversation as Harvey Weinstein's criminal trial is having its start in New York. And to be clear, I do not want to have this conversation about Harvey Weinstein because the whole point of the movie is we should not be doing that. But I did want to emphasize the themes that actually might have overlap with the trial and the film in terms of who is centered in conversations and stories and who is not, whose perspectives are considered valuable and worthy and whose are not. And I think those questions, in a strange way, are being litigated in New York City in a courtroom right now. So I wanted to start sort of with that framing of things and then ask you guys specifically about one of the things that really interested me about the resonance between the trial and the film, which is the interplay between specificity and broadness, the interplay between intimacy and big symbolic ideas. Because one of my favorite parts of the movie was this sense that this is one person and you are so in her character and in her world, and yet she's not one person. She is so much more in another way. So I wanted to ask you both about that sort of interplay between the smallness and the bigness and between specificity and symbol. And I guess, Julia, I'll start with you if you don't mind.
Want me to start?
I must say,
well,
maybe Kitty should start because she's the director.
What I will say is that we made a film about a woman who works. She's the youngest woman on the desk of a predatory film executive. So it's not like her boss is never seen. He's sort of heard on the phone. He's barely seen in the film. But we were really specific. We didn't want to make a film about Harvey Weinstein or about any of these men. We were interested in the machinery that surrounds these men and sort of the systems, which sounds very broad and vague, like you were saying, but we were exploring that by sort of showing the details, which is just living one day in the life of the youngest person working at this workplace. So the idea was we see her turning on the lights and doing the photocopying, and we really honed in on those details of like what her day would be like, and just the tiny, for me what was really important is tiny kind of examples of gendered work environments, which is the men treating her differently or her being excluded from certain tasks that the men were given. So all of that, we're kind of highlighting kind of all these like little moments that can really strip a woman of her self-confidence and that are like part of this larger system that we're talking about, which keeps women out of power. So that is a very broad, vague answer for what you're trying to say.
It's a broad question.
Yeah.
I appreciate you working with it.
But yeah, that's where we're at. And Julia's just honed right in on this character. And so it is a very emotional story. It is her story, one day in her life.
It's interesting that you said that it's tiny, like it feels so small, but also at the same time it feels kind of, I don't know, like not loud, but big. And very early in the process, Kitty, she made it very clear that she wanted this film to be quiet, like more of an internal film rather than an external film. So because the problem is so big, right, that it's more of an interesting mixture if you have everything be quiet, but the issue is such a big issue. But also when I was prepping it, it was important for me that whoever my scene partner was, or whoever Jane, the character, was, I don't want to say in the scene, but whoever she was in the room with, they weren't noticing what she was feeling, so she actually felt very alone and small. But the audience was more her subconscious, and then that's the experience is more like it's more tense because you know what she's feeling, but the other people don't even care. So it's harder and it's more tension.
Yeah.
So it's big and then it's small. So it's like that interesting combination in a way.
Yeah, I really love that about it, and that's so rare actually to do that effectively, I think, in films. So
But I feel like a lot of times, I mean, it's not just, I mean, especially with this film, I wanted to make sure that the audience was kind of like Jane's subconscious, so you know what she was really feeling subconsciously. But I try to do that with all my characters, but especially this one, because she really had to be alone and feel like no one was hearing her. And that's what is so tragic about it. And Kitty's just so brilliant. She made that very clear.
Julia's brilliant. Julia's so good. Sorry. We'll stop praising each other. It's very boring.
We're really in love, guys. Like,
We're reunited today, and it's very
I
exciting.
know, I didn't see her in a month, so I'm really happy.
Well, I've heard the film described as a thriller. One of the reactions that I actually had to it is that it's also kind of a horror movie in a way. I mean, speaking to her interiority and her inability to sort of escape the circumstances, it reminded me a little bit of that sense in horror movies of don't go through that door, don't go through that door, and then you watch the person go through the door, and it's that kind of thing. And does that track with you? Did you want to make a thriller? Did you want to have that level of tension in the narrative?
Well, I think we're going for tension more than horror or
Okay.
thriller. I mean, I think those genre words, we weren't trying to lean into any of the tropes of
Okay.
that. We were specifically trying to avoid sensationalizing this topic
Oh, for
altogether.
sure. Yeah,
which
and I didn't
is-
mean to imply that.
Yeah, which is sort of why it's very understated.
Yeah.
It is just one day, like one woman following her basically through each and every task, even the most mundane of them. Sorry, but it's true. And so that was really the focus, was making sure we made something that was, I'm not sure, like that didn't lead into those tropes, but instead existed on its own merit to talk about something that isn't spoken about as often.
Well, yeah, and it's obviously not a horror film, but it's scary.
Right, that's what I mean. It has
Yeah,
those
and I think the
resonant
reason
tensions.
why it's
Yeah.
if you want to make anything scary, you have to make it familiar for a person. Like, it's not a horror film, but why in horror films do they always put like dolls? And they put it like but dolls can be scary too. Like, you see them like with a kid with a stroller with the dolls, and it's not scary, but then you turn off the light and you're like, oh, that's so scary. But so it's not that it's close to home, but you can see how people, assistants especially, get treated, even if they're not sexually abused or assaulted, or even if they're not women. I mean, there's also men who are treated, male assistants who are treated terrible. And people just should not treat people like that. And that's really what the movie is about, you know?
Yeah.
Too.
Yeah, no, the tension, I mean, it's so much of it is in Julia's face. It's so close up,
amazing.
and she holds so much kind of, tension in just everything she's doing and as she's going about her day. So that was, for me as a director, it was such a blessing to have such a phenomenal actor. I can just throw the camera on her and leave it there for, forever. And she's just, amazingly expressive and fabulous. That's it.
Well, along those lines, can we talk about one of the pivotal scenes in the film, which is the scene in the HR office, the HR scene? And how did you together kind of think about that scene? What were you wanting to evoke with it? Should I describe it, or would one of you want to describe it? There's basically a moment where Jane kind of has seen all that she can, essentially, and goes to an HR person who she thinks will be on her side, and tells him what she's observed in this office, which includes a lot of very terrible things. And you slowly see through the scene her realizing that this person is not on her side. And the HR person is played by Matthew McFadden, who's wonderful in it. And it's just this moment of realizing the depth of the problem, the systemic rot at the heart of the film. So, and I would love to hear you guys just talk in detail about making that scene.
I mean, it was a 12-page scene.
Yeah.
And we had Matthew for one day or 2 days, but we did that whole scene just over and over again. They did it without a mistake every single time the whole way through. It was incredible to watch and witness because they would take it in different directions. So I was very lucky to just sort of, but I must say in writing it, when we were putting it together, I was really careful about making sure that he was there to protect the company, but yet his argument isn't crazy and irrational. He's sort of poking holes in her argument, and she doesn't have enough information to really get her point across. So it is, they both have a clear kind of, I mean, I guess I'm going to say argument again, and we put them in this room together, and they have to kind of duke it out, and they just, they brought everything to the table, so it was wonderful.
I mean, the thing that I remember when we were shooting that scene that was very emotional for me, and I was like, whoa, this is so heavy, is you know, throughout the scene, when it feels like he doesn't get it, that this is what she's dealing with in the company, it's almost, she feels like she's digging herself in a deeper hole, and it's like, well, why was, then she starts to think, then she starts to feel stupid almost in a way, and like, that maybe she should have not said anything at all. And that's what's so tragic about the scene, because anybody would feel like that, you know. Again, it's the feeling small is really, really hard.
And almost that sort of corporate enforced gaslighting in some
Right,
ways.
and also, you know, after that happened, what is she supposed to do?
Right.
Realistically, what is she going to do? She's going to go to work the next day, realistically. You know? I mean, look how many things happen all the time that you're just like, it's so awkward to deal with, and you're like, whoa, what was that? Like, you don't do anything.
Yeah, the system is bigger than her.
Yeah.
She's like one small part of a larger thing, a systemic rot, as you were saying.
Right. And also another element of that scene that just cut me was the weaponization of her own aspiration and her own, you know, sense of, I want to succeed in this industry. And the HR person essentially says, you want to succeed, don't you? So maybe stop talking, you know, essentially. And that, I think, is very familiar to a lot of people, and really just was a powerful inclusion.
In every business, that's
Yeah,
familiar.
right.
Not
right,
just
exactly.
the film business.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I
Okay, and I wanted to ask you guys how you actually did the research. Kitty, I read that you interviewed over 100 people.
Yeah.
That's okay. Could you tell us a little bit about that?
So I had a few friends that worked at the Weinstein Company. I started interviewing people from the Weinstein Company. I then interviewed people from Miramax, and this is in New York, LA, London. And then I interviewed people that worked for other studios or agencies in the film industry. And then I went back to Australia and started interviewing my friends in tech, engineering, and I was hearing the same stories over and over again. And that was sort of when I committed it to paper. I had just like the repetition was definite, you know, like there was it's just happening every day all over the world. And so that to me was like, oh, this is so, it's about such tiny little things, but they're so heartbreaking to each individual. And so the idea was let's get that side of the story instead of just focusing on, you know, the Weinstein type characters. I wanted to look at something that was kind of, you know, broader and more human, essentially. More relatable.
And what about the decision to so Weinstein in this is not Weinstein, essentially. It's a sort of, you know, non-character character, and he sort of makes an appearance but is very marginal. Can you talk about the path to sort of making him that way? Because at first you weren't going to have him at all, right?
No, but you have to kind of show his power over the employee, so you kind of need a sense that he's there. It feels a bit like false if he's not there at all. But I was kind of conscious of everyone, like firstly, bad men have had enough screen time. Secondly, I mean,
Amen.
we know what happens behind that closed door. We've read that in the papers. We know what's going on. We don't need to see behind there. What I was interested in particularly was everything that existed around that door and what the people knew that were on the other side of it and how much information people had. So that kind of became my focus.
Okay. And could we talk also, another scene that I loved was the paper cut scene. There's a scene where she gets a paper cut, and it's, again, to the quietness, but the power. It's just such a small thing, and it's such a mundane thing.
Yeah, and paper cuts are terrible.
They're terrible. They're terrible. But they really, they're
really like, they're not a big deal, but you're just like, this is so painful.
And they have the power to ruin your day, maybe several days. Yeah, I mean, I think, like, and so could you just talk about how did that moment get into the film?
It's a nice symbol of like this idea that it's such a tiny thing that's almost invisible, yet it's so painful, you know what I mean? And she's got that. So I guess it just became like another part of her terrible, terrible day. But yeah, I don't know. It's a beautiful little symbol. I guess it was kind of this whole day is like death by 1,000 cuts. You know, every single scene there's something cutting, and it's just getting at her and really kind of rattling her and shaking her self-confidence. And so it became one of those cuts.
Also opening his envelopes.
Yes, for an invitation, right?
Yeah. Yes, all these fancy parties.
Well, and so one of the things along those lines that I wanted to ask about was just sort of the way that the narrative plays out. And it reminded me of, you know, when you go up a roller coaster and it's like, and the tension builds and builds and builds and builds and builds. But it felt like then there was no release. It was just, it left you here. And it was such a powerful ending, I thought, to sort of not have the gift of that release. You have to sort of live in her horror, in her tension, in her problem, and that is the end of the movie.
Well, it takes place pre all this news breaking, pre the Me Too movement gaining kind of steam and being what we know it is to be today. It's before all the hashtags, before we had the language, before we had people to go to when we had problems like this. But whilst it does, it's still like a lot of what's in the film, I'd say most of what's in the film is still happening today, because it is about those tiny moments that are more systemic and more kind of part of our culture. And so in a sense, we don't really let people off the hook, because we want people to go back to their workplaces tomorrow and the next day and trying to figure out, well, how can we make our workplaces more fair and equitable? What can we do to make it safer for people? And so that was the kind of intention.
Yeah, and I love that. And I think you don't often see that in films. It felt like such a revelatory choice to just, you know, have the audience be there right with her, as they have been the whole time, and there they will both stay. And that's it.
And that's what happened for years and years and years, you know what I mean?
It's also realistic.
Right.
Much, you know, than saying, well, everything's fine now.
Yeah, I'm gonna eat a muffin. And
I'm one of my many muffins. Faint.
And along those lines, what about the idea to include her parents as sort of, you know, side characters?
It's funny, I had a young girl come up to me and goes, oh, she's so not cool. She's always chatting to her parents and not to her friends.
No.
But I used to just call my
I
parents
call
all
my
the time.
parents all the
Yeah.
time.
So I just...
Who is this girl?
I don't know. She's cooler than us. But it was funny. It was just like directly from my own experience and from experiences I heard from other people, I guess. And
and you know, and I guess maybe it's interesting because, you know, I mean, your parents, if you have if you have a good relationship with your parents, you're always gonna like have that unconditional love from them, and you know, that's it's Jane's back when she's feeling just completely spineless in a way. So that's probably why she calls him every 5 minutes.
I'd also say they're so proud of her, and the heartbreaking thing is they don't know what she's going through, and I think she struggles to tell them exactly what's going on, because how do you tell your parents who are so beaming with pride over the fact that their daughter's got this amazing job, this amazing opportunity? So like that kind of tension was part of it as well.
Yeah, and everyone seems to acknowledge that there's an element of punishment for, you know, having this job, right? We know it's hard work, honey. We know that, you know.
But everybody wanted to work at a place.
Yeah, no, exactly. Like you are being rewarded almost with the punishment, because everyone just sort of agrees.
Why she didn't.
This is normal.
That's why she didn't say anything probably the next day, and she's going to show up to work because someone else 50 other girls can take her job.
Yeah. Which is one of, if you haven't seen the film, which is another thing that the HR person reminds her of, that there's a whole line of people waiting for this job if she gives it up. So yeah. Let's talk about this in relation to documentaries. I read somewhere that this actually began life in a way as a documentary. Is that accurate?
Not really, no. I mean, I was working on a consent in college campuses, but what I do, if you've seen any of my other films, is they're always like hybrid work. I've never made a straight documentary, so that's not my thing. So it always had like a different, I never knew what shape it would take, but this is sort of where it is. But it was documentary style research, I'd say, like in a way that we're interviewing people, chatting to them. It was really meticulous research, like it wasn't, you know, asking like, what kind of cereal did you eat in the morning, like that kind of thing. So that, I guess, lends itself into, and I come from doc stuff, so I've had a background in it, so.
Was there anything in the interviews that really surprised you, that people told you that seemed like, whoa, I didn't think of it that way?
Honestly, I was trying to avoid the extraordinary. What I was interested in the ordinary, the things that came up again and again that everyone could relate to. If anything was too crazy, like helicopters coming down, or I was thinking, oh, I don't know if I really want to, like, that would make sense to somebody who works in banking, or you know what I mean. So we did try and make sure that the Jane's story is like universal and one that most young women who were in the workforce and young men could relate to. So yeah. So there was cool stories, but they didn't make the cut.
And do you think of her as a composite character?
Yeah, definitely.
Okay.
I mean, she is a mix of everything, and she's also a mix of my own experiences. And Julia and I worked a lot on the character and who she was and what her motivations were, so that kind of is all fused together to create Jane.
Okay.
It was great. We had a lot of, prep time.
That's
for
awesome.
it. And it's because I started in movies, and they have prep time, and TV they don't have so much prep time. So going back doing a movie again after TV, which I love doing TV, but for completely different reasons. But it was really nice having that prep time with Kitty and just getting to talk about the character, and especially we prepped a lot with the HR scene. That is the movie in a way.
Yeah.
I mean, there's the whole movie is the movie, but that scene is so important.
Yeah. And it feels like the low, sort of, if the tension, it feels like the drop, but then you get right back up to the tension and go from there. Yeah.
Yeah, because she's collapsing, like she's about to explode. That's why she goes,
Yeah. And can we, along those lines, talk about the clothing, the costumes? Because I just found it fascinating the way, because I think of when she goes back to work after that scene, she puts on her coat, she puts on her big parka, and puts on her, her scarf, and sort of cocoons herself. And I just thought that it was so interesting, the interplay between, what she was wearing in the office, what she was wearing outside, and all of that.
From what I remember, I feel like the reason why I wore a pink turtleneck was because I wore a pink turtleneck to the meeting. Is that correct?
To the meeting, yeah.
When we met up the first time.
Yeah, she was wearing a pink turtleneck.
But I'm also always wearing a turtleneck.
I don't know if that's true. I'd like to say
No, I remember what turtleneck I remember what turtleneck I wore.
It wasn't.
And it was pink.
We did have a costume designer who brought in her, and but we were looking at kind of this pink, dusty pink. So it wasn't like overly feminine, but also. There's a beauty to it, though. She's like, it's a very kind of gorgeous. She's very fragile in it, but also she's still got a Julia has a lot of strength. If you've ever seen her on Ozark, is like one of the strongest. Like, there's so much strength to everything she does. So it was nice to kind of make her give her a little bit of femininity, but not push it too far into that space. So but yeah, I think she wanted to burn it by the end because she wears it in every scene.
Now I miss it.
I'm sure you can wear it again if you want.
But what you were saying, femininity, but also there's a strength to her. I mean, I feel like when I was researching the part, the technical side of it, like I would make the world's worst assistant, terrible. So my nightmare before shooting the movie was, oh my God, people are gonna watch this movie, like seeing like an actor is playing an assistant. Would be terrible. So I went to my manager's office, and they're lovely. They're not like this office at all. And I would tape, film my manager's assistant typing on the computer, answering the phones, and kind of look around like all the assistants. And they all kind of answered the phones in a very similar way. Like there was a strength behind their voice, and there was an urgency, but there was also this calmness in a way that they're like, hello, yeah, okay, yes, I'll put you online. Like, you know what I mean? That it was like, okay, we need to get the job done, but also stay calm.
Yeah. Well, no, in a way, there's something almost militaristic about it, just in the sense of they are sort of guarding the general, right? Like they are.
Well, they have 5 other phone calls at
the
same time.
Yeah,
so, and they're writing an email at the same time.
And they want to sort of telegraph that they're very busy, right? And not the people you observe, but the people in this film want to sort of let the callers know we're very busy.
So give me an answer right now. Yes.
But still be polite.
Still be polite. Yeah.
Well, let's along those lines talk a little bit about the dynamics between Jane and her fellow workers, because I did find that really fascinating. Like you mentioned, the sort of the gender issues at play, and if you haven't seen the film, it's very sort of prototypical guy behavior, a little bit bullying, I would say, or not quite bullying, but letting Jane know that she's
a new kid.
She's different. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, we have these two beautiful boys, Noah and John, who play the men in the movie, and they're so fabulous and so kind, and so we had a really warm and loving environment. But they were, I mean, their job was they have a bit more power than her, and they're getting, it's a terribly abusive environment. They're struggling too with it. So the idea that any kind of leg up they can get, if it means throwing her under the bus, they might do it in order to get the next, like, get up to the next level. So it's a very delicate thing, because they're not bad people.
Right.
They're just trying to get ahead in a really difficult situation and a really disturbing kind of environment.
But there's also one part in the movie where Noah Robinson, who's also there, he's a great actor, and Johnny Orsini, also, they're both, so everybody in the cast was great. But Noah walked out of the office and he like just got yelled at, and like as an audience you like feel really bad for him too. You know, it's just like so sad.
I'm nice.
Yeah. And you're like, even though you were kind of a jerk like a scene before, but I feel bad for you.
It's funny, but they don't do anything outright that's mean, but they do little things like they throw a paper ball. Noah throws paper balls at Julia to get her attention, which people find very disturbing. They're just like, oh my God, the paper balls, I could feel them. And it was just sort of a simple, playful activity. But it's funny, people bring their own like experiences to this, and I'm sure there's a lot packed into anyone's sort of viewing of the film and how she's being treated and what that means. So yeah, I think it's all, it's subjective.
Yeah, I think so. And because of the hermetic environment, because it feels just so constraining and tight all the time, every behavior is amplified. It seems like every little slight, every little, insult feels like a much bigger deal perhaps than it is in reality, just because of that environment.
But it is a big deal. People are sensitive.
Yeah, I mean,
that's what people
that's
don't
true.
understand. It's
Yeah.
like when you have an assistant, like everybody has feelings in a way. So you have to. People always forget to acknowledge people. I feel like that, but acknowledgement is like one of the most important things out there. It is actually the most important thing. You know?
Yeah. But then they acknowledge her in ways that are, in some ways, so demeaning. Like they read her email and give her advice about what she should write to the boss who has berated her and that kind of thing.
You could say that's demeaning, or you could say that they're trying to help her.
That's
too.
true.
Yeah,
and maybe what's interesting is, it's kind of both, right? Like, yeah.
That's the complex thing about it is it all can be interpreted different ways. But we're looking at it through Jane's eyes as we go through it, so we're kind of seeing it her way. But I'm sure if we made a film from Noah's character's perspective, it would be a very different.
Yeah, that's very true. And do you think of this as a political movie? Do you want it to be thought of in that way?
I do, but also at the same, so I do, and I have a lot to say, and there's a lot packed in about gendered work environments and about this system that we're all a part of, and a solid, concrete examples of what's wrong.
Yeah.
But I also think Julia Garner is an amazing actress, and it is just an emotional journey, so you can just go in and have a good time if that's what you want to do. So it kind of works, hopefully, on both levels. Hopefully people come away thinking a little bit about the issues at hand, but yeah.
But emotions come in.
Oh,
whatever, even in politics,
Oh,
it
for sure.
usually
Even more
starts
so,
even more so. So
Yeah.
it kind of is like goes hand in hand.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's the thing. When I signed up for this movie, I knew that people were gonna talk about it. It's not the type of movie that you're gonna like sit and eat popcorn and like candy and like go like this is fun. It's like it has a message and you want to think about it.
But also I've heard people were eating popcorn and throwing popcorn at the screen at the HR
nice.
guy. And everything. So I think it is like you can have popcorn and
Make an
enjoy
issue.
it.
You could just be like you're wasting food.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, that's the thing, because there are villains, right? Like, and it's more subtle and it's more interesting because of that. But there definitely are villains that you can throw the popcorn at, and that's a nice catharsis to have.
Yeah, I think if you've ever worked in an office environment, I'm sure you'll find a lot of things that you can throw popcorn at.
Yes.
I think.
I also always feel that when art's successful, and to me, when it doesn't, not everybody has to love it, but you should be able to walk away from it and it should stick with you, and you should be able to like talk about it. It should affect you.
Yeah.
So that's, to me, is successful.
For what it's worth, I have not been able to stop thinking or talking about this film.
Thank you so
Really,
much.
for me, it was so successful on those levels, and I think I write a lot about these topics, and it really got to something in a way that I don't think any nonfiction that I've seen has quite been able to tap into, just through the power of fiction, which is amazing. So yeah,
Her performance.
and so much. I mean, just in your face.
Yeah.
You conveyed so much, and it was remarkable. Yeah.
No, she's great. Sorry.
It was very nerve-wracking doing it, though. I was like, I hope I'm not like being repetitive. I'm just like, like or whatever. I don't know.
So subtle what you're doing, and it's so powerful. So yeah, I agree. Well, that's the thing about a documentary. If it had been a documentary, it would have been people complaining, I guess, about, oh, this happened, that was bad. This happened, that was bad. This way, you get to kind of go through it with a person, be in their shoes, in the shoes of somebody you've often probably ignored in the office or haven't paid attention to. It's like, how about we center that person? How about it becomes her narrative, and we're forced to stay with her through all of the yucky stuff, the highs and lows for 90 minutes.
Yeah.
So,
That's what we're hoping that people are going to take away from this.
I think so. And you're so much in her just all the time, and just from the very beginning of her day to the very end of her day, and it's the intimacy of it is really amazing, I think, to just have that connection, which is wonderful.
Thank you. That means a lot to us.
Oh, good. No, I'm glad. And I did want to ask you about, let's see, one criticism, if you don't mind, because I just wanted to, I found this criticism I did not agree with it, but I found it fascinating, so I would love to hear your thoughts on it. This was from Variety. It called the film an exasperatingly low-key look at gender dynamics in the workplace. And then basically compared it to The Devil Wears Prada, and said that compared to that, the approach is flat and anti-dramatic. And I would just love to hear,
First of all, The Devil Wears Prada is a great film.
Yeah.
We just
Really
all
is. Oh, for
agree.
sure.
Like,
That's not what we were making. But the idea that I went in to make The Devil Wears Prada and failed and made this instead is just so absurd. It makes me so angry. We were specifically trying trying to avoid sensationalizing, trying to avoid creating something that felt like it trivialized the subject matter that it's exploring. I don't know, that made me so There's also another line in that article where he said, wouldn't it be great if the character had a boyfriend that she could chat to?
I didn't even,
Yeah, and I was like, oh my God. Yeah, I mean, it was...
I don't read any.
Sorry, I'm sorry.
and I'm sorry to bring it here. I figured you guys might have thoughts on it, and I really wanted to hear your reaction.
But it's like what I'm saying. Like, not everybody's gonna have an opinion. So,
That's true.
You put yourself out there. Like, what are you expecting?
Yeah.
Especially in this industry.
I also think when genres are blent in such an interesting way, that people might not get it. People might have one idea of one particular genre in mind and not see the nuance and subtlety. So that could be part of it as well.
I think he wanted the rape scene. It sounds to me like the idea that he wanted something more it's like, no, we're exploring something like more complex or more nuanced, and you've just missed all that because you were waiting for something that we were never going to give you. And you know what I mean? I don't know, that might not be his intention, and I can't say it, but it does feel like what they're asking for is something a little more dramatic.
Right.
And I think that's exactly what we weren't, not dramatic. I mean, the film is dramatic, but something more, sensational and
exploiting
in
a way.
Yeah, exactly.
I think, but also that's what I loved about the script was, I just love when things are kind of ambiguous, and I feel like things are more scary and terrifying when you don't fully see it and you have to imagine it in a way.
Yeah.
I'm just trying to think of a film, like a perfect example. I mean, Drive. Remember when they had in the elevator and it was just on Carey Mulligan's face, and you heard the cracking, but you didn't see anything. That's more powerful because you're just imagining it. So you don't have to see a rape scene. Like, we know what's gonna happen.
Yeah, it's the kind of movie that, you can have a couple of people like that just don't get it, and then you can have people that grab you and just are so affected by it. So it just, I think that happens with most films, but maybe this one even more so because of the issues that it's based around.
Yeah, that makes sense. And it's so interesting that it feels like there's a symbolic shift happening where, in the past, the sort of canonical example of sexual violence was a violent rape, by someone you didn't know. But, there were these very sort of specific ideas about what sexual violence was. And so much of Me Too has been about complicating that and making it much more about the emotional effect on someone, the psychological effect, and saying it doesn't have to be, violent in the stereotypical way for it to be a kind of violence. And I think that this film really captures that shift in such eloquent ways. So I appreciate it.
That was the intention, is like, let's get to the bigger issues. This is a system that's left women hurt and sidelined for years and years and years, and what can we do to change that, and how can we highlight these kind of tiny little things that really can affect somebody, but are often kind of ignored or dismissed as, oh, she's just, having a bad day. Right. So yeah, exactly. So thank you.
Well, I think it is time to turn it over to you guys for questions. Okay, we've got someone in the back. Yep.
Yay. I have not seen the film yet, but listening to you talk about this, I personally have lived through and escaped a couple assistant positions with an emotionally abusive boss. And I'm curious, with the research you did and telling the story, were there any conclusions you came to of what individuals who are in those scenarios can do, but also what we can do, people who are now aware of this and want to change the way the system is? Because one thing I kind of concluded is that emotional abuse is it's not illegal and not necessarily newsworthy. So, and that's a really big problem in the entertainment industry. So what can we really do to change that part of it?
I think we can look at, there's a lot of, we've actually partnered with the New York Women's Foundation, who are doing amazing work with women-led organizations all over the country, and so that's been exceptional. So there's resources out there, and there are people out there that are fighting this fight and are doing kind of incredible work. The other thing I'd point to, there are kind of things you can access if you're in those positions. I think Pay Up Hollywood is doing an incredible, the hashtag Pay Up Hollywood movement is trying to make sure that the assistants have fairer and safer kind of work environments and work practices and better wages. So I think there's a lot of people out there that are fighting this fight, and we're just trying to kind of highlight just how tough these jobs can be. So I'll point to them and go, we've said enough. It's time to listen to all these incredible people out there who are doing really amazing work. So yeah, they're just a few, but there's so many people really we're doing something with tomorrow with iGen Poo and the
Yes.
So we're kind of I would point to other people, really. That's my kind of thing.
I think also people know when they're being dismissive towards somebody. It's not that people know when they acknowledge someone, and people are aware. People are not they're not that oblivious. Unless if someone really is, if you're working with somebody all the time, you know, it's not that, I don't want to say it's not that difficult. It's not that hard to be kind. It isn't. It's actually easier,
That's it, the idea people kind of can watch the film. I've had a few bosses watch it, come out of it and say, oh God. It took one person who's a filmmaker that I know, took 3 weeks for them to reply to me after watching it. I knew I'd seen the Vimeo link, so I was like, why isn't they replying? 3 weeks later, it said, sorry, I'm feeling so guilty because I have a few assistants who are doing a little too much for me right now. So there is this idea that hopefully it can shift people's thinking around how they're treating the people around them. So the more people we can get to go and see it and just start to think about those people that they employ, that will help, hopefully. So we're just trying to aid the conversation, really. That's the best we can do.
Hi, I'm Alan Salkin. I work for LA Magazine. 2 questions. Why do you always wear turtlenecks? And you said it. And then also, I think I can almost imagine, I'm wondering if you would think about a version of this in which Ruth was hired as a Hollywood assistant, and the kind of Tarantino revenge fantasy against the Weinsteins.
Oh my God.
We can discuss the idea later.
I'll answer your 2 wonderful questions. I wear turtlenecks in the winter because I get very cold, so that's easy. And then Ruth, she would quickly become the boss. And I don't know if Ruth would be the nicest boss. Can you imagine Ruth, going to Me Too rally? That would be, that would be I don't know. Yeah, that would be really funny, actually. I don't know, but that's a great idea.
There's the sequel, thank you.
Any more? Oh, yep. Can we do it without a microphone? Is that okay?
Yeah.
Okay. Oh, yeah.
As someone who's newer to the industry and just kind of transitioning out of that assistant PA runner role into more of a career and trying to find my own self-worth and value. And so I haven't seen the movie, but that HR scene sounds fascinating to me. Was there a point in either of your careers where you were transitioning into hey, I'm actually pretty badass, I have something to offer, and I'm not just nobody? And were you ever treated that way, I guess?
To me, I was a lot, and this is not even as assistant. When I was here a few years ago with a film, I'm a film director, and I was so excited to be at Sundance, and I arrive at the party, and the first question I get asked by somebody is, So who gives you your ideas? Is it James or Scott? And they're my two male producers. And the idea that I did not come up with my own movie, or that there was men that did it for me, made me so angry. And there was kind of, this would happen again and again on the festival circuit, to the point where I was so tired of it that that's partly what kind of inspired the movie. Is like, how can we change? We can't just get rid of Harvey Weinstein and say, oh, we're all fine now, it's fixed. Like, the problem is bigger. The problem isn't the way people think about, like, the way people view women, or what their skill sets are, where they belong, or like all that stuff needs to be unpicked. And so that kind of, so I've had a heap of those experiences, even as a film director, so I'm sorry, it doesn't get any easier. Like,
obviously I'm an actor, so you question your worth all the time as an actor. But I've been very lucky that I've worked with very really wonderful, kind people that, I haven't been unlucky with sets and everything. So, but, just knowing a lot of friends that haven't, worked on terrible sets and environments and all those things, in the end of the day, the most important thing is just to, again, be kind, but also just focus on yourself and your work, and just continue what's good for you. If you're good in something, continue doing it. If not, then don't, in a way. So just, it's about being kind and about the work,
Okay, any other questions? Yep.
I'm Deborah French Fisher. I'm a writer-director, and I'm so interested in your research. I have not seen the film yet. In terms of the intersectionality of women on this topic, and did your research include a spectrum of what it's like when race enters into feminism, and how?
I would say I interviewed, my majority of the film started in the film industry. Honestly, if we look at different companies, and I'll use the Weinstein company as an example, there were almost, I think there was 2 women of color. Like, it was so small. So the idea that you could, if I had have made Julia's character a woman of color, people would have pointed and said, oh, we know who she is, kind of thing. Like, that was really the scary kind of idea for me, is like, oh, we can't, like, it's terrifying how gross and how kind of white male-centric that company was. So, I mean, I think that's almost what led me to go, well, we'll have a white lead, which was, I feel like there are more stories to be told, and I'm sure if you add race to that mix, it's going to get so much more difficult and so much more. So we do. So there are a few women of color in the movie who come in who have different roles in the film, but it is, it's tough, and I'm hoping that more movies, like the idea that this film can get up and get successful and people can see it when it's just about an office and a workplace and it's about gendered work environments, hopefully that inspires other people to get more movies up like this, and hopefully we can see more people's stories on screen and center those women who for so long were not the center of our we're not like leading the narrative. So that's what I have to say on that subject.
Well, I think that's a wonderful note to end on. Thank you both so much for being here.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. Thank you all.